A very warm good afternoon to all of you. Hello and welcome to the Track 5, looking beyond immediate recovery pathways to sustainable and resilient livelihoods on day 2 of the Livelihoods India Summit. Before we go into the session, I would like to cover a few housekeeping points. Today's session are being recorded. You'll be able to view them on our YouTube channel under the name of Access Development Services. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it further. We also invite your comments and questions. Please take a look at the Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for any speaker at any point, you can type it in there and we'll hold it in for the discussion portion at the end of the session. I welcome you to the session Development Pathways for Social Protection of Vulnerable Population in India, curated by UNDP. It's my pleasure to welcome the panelists for the session. And the panelists include Ms. Divya Ravindranathan, Consultant, Academics and Research, Indian Institute of Human Settlements, Mr. Asif Sheikh, Co-founder Jan Sahas, Ms. Mirai Chatterjee, Director Seva Social Security, Self-Employed Women's Association. The moderator for the session is Ms. Ami Mishra, Senior Economist and Head Policy Unit at UNDP India. Ami is an economist with experience spanning a wide range of international development issues, including trade and investment, public finance management, development finance, education, climate change, and gender. She has worked with national and subnational government public policy think tanks and bilateral and multilateral development agencies across India and Africa. With this, I hand over the charge now to Ms. Ami. Over to you, Ami. Thank you.
So how would you like to do that, Digvijayji? Would you like to ask us the questions?
Sure, absolutely. A very warm welcome to everyone. While we wait for me, we might as well start. So the first aspect, I mean, we all know that social protection has become critical. And I think the panel agrees more or less that there is consensus on this, that the past 2 years has made it even more so important as to where do we go from here, why social protection is important, especially for the vulnerable population, because it is, people are trying to get off cyclical poverty that exists in our country. But when a pandemic like this or a situation like this arises, it has a massive impact on people's livelihoods, how livelihoods have been shut, how people had to migrate. And the impact is not only urban, it is not only rural, it's all across. So going from there, I mean, the first aspect that we would like to hear from the panel is what are the elements in social protection that have worked, tremendously during the past 2 years? If we keep COVID as the center, what has worked? So I would request any of the panelists to come up first, and then one by one we can take it. Who would like to go first? And we have Ami back as well. Ami, I have just asked the question on social protection and the elements that have worked, so the panel would be responding to that. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you. So can I request Mirai to go first, please?
Sure. Thank you very much, and delighted to be here at the Livelihood Summit, and thanks to UNDP for this kind invitation and my co-panelists too. So what are the elements of social protection that have worked, you asked, Ami and Digvijay? So I think first and foremost, what we have seen from our own country, but from others, is the importance of a universal approach. No one should be left behind or left out. I really would like to emphasize that because unfortunately in India, we still are not taking a universal approach. And I think this is critical. I think what we've learned from the pandemic is what we knew, but it's been underscored, that the importance of a decentralized approach. It cannot be a one-size-fits-all in a country as huge as ours. It has to necessarily be a localized approach with tweaking for context. So flexibility and, if you will, an evolving approach. I also think what's required is a minimum social protection cover for all our citizens. And then what are the elements of such a social protection cover? So very quickly, from our almost now 5 decades of organizing informal women workers, what we've learned from them is that social protection or social security should at least include healthcare, childcare, insurance, pension, and housing with basic infrastructure, basic amenities like a tap and toilet in every home. The other point that has worked in this pandemic that we've seen loud and clear is local implementation and action by local people, local frontline workers, and I would say particularly women. And yet another thing that is to some extent been successful is digitalization. Not just the government, but many of us who run social protection programs have been slow off the block on this, but the pandemic forced us to digitalize, and it has been a good experience. Of course, it's been a mixed experience also, because not everyone, particularly women, have access to smartphones, and then the internet and infrastructure, always issues. But it's a work in progress, and I think the direction is now set. So I think this has been workable. And last but not least is partnerships. I think the big learning during the pandemic is that no government, Indian or otherwise, can do it alone. And it requires a combination of people to work together, civil society, unions, cooperatives, government, public health authorities, and donors. And then only we can move fast and actually not only reach emergency relief, but also begin the recovery and rehabilitation process. And just to end, I want to end what our members always say, which is that livelihood and social protection are two sides of the same coin. One without the other doesn't make sense. And since we're at a livelihood summit, I would like to emphasize what my Seva sisters say, two sides of the same coin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mirai. That was excellent. That was very specific, clear ideas from you, and thank you for that. Ashif, can I request you to go ahead from all your experience with the migrant workers in the past? What is a system, and what are the elements of it? What are some important elements that such a system must have?
Yeah. So thanks, Ami, and thanks for this opportunity to share my ideas and experience as far as the migrant worker are concerned. So in India, we have about 450 million unorganized sector workers, and half of them, half of the unorganized sector workers, come from the migration. And basically in India, internal migration is a very big issue. So most of the time, people from the rural India migrating to urban India for job and employment opportunity. As of the government data, government recognized about 140 million the workers as a migrant worker. If you can see the non-government data is about 250 million. Basically, the migration increased the vulnerability in these families because they come from the rural area to urban area. And most of the Indian social security program or worker protection program focus at source or destination. And basically in most of our social security or social protection program, basically no any portability system is available or exists. And portability is very, very important, because if I'm a migrant worker and migrating from Bundelkhand to Delhi NCR area, so sometime I am eligible to get the rural employment guarantee scheme benefit in my village, but not in Delhi NCR area. And basically in India, we have a seasonal migration. So basically people are not migrating for all 365 days or 12 months. They are migrating between 6 to 9 months, and remaining 3 to 6 months they expend in the source area. So I think in that context, portability is very, very important, but portability is not exist. And basically, as you raised question about why social security, and I think as far as the migrant workers, social security is very, very important and crucial to reduce their vulnerability. And basically, sometime when we discuss about the social security, we only focus on entitlement or government services or schemes. But actually, social security is beyond that. So for example, in my case, like the migrant worker case, forced labor or like the prevalence of forced labor at destination is very huge issue. And basically, prevalence of forced labor is increase the vulnerability of the community. And just because of that, no any safety net is available, so they can negotiate or they can fight with the employer or exploit data. So these are the issues basically. So in my understanding, when we discuss about the social security, we need to take a broader idea of the social security, where we can ensure dignity and the respect for the worker and the migrant workers. Same time, if any discriminatory practices exist, for example, minimum wage, people are expending like 8 to 10 hours in the construction site, and if they not get the minimum wage, that's also violating like the their social security. And basically in that context, from my understanding, we can focus on dignity, respect, non-discriminatory practices for the worker, as well as how we can give us guarantee to the workers at source as well as at the destination, employment guarantee or healthcare or food security. So currently Government of India introduced, like in January 2021, first time government introduced a portable program called One Nation, One Ration Card. And in this program, basically the worker can get the the ration at source as well as at the destination. But I think this kind of like the element we need to introduce in each and every social security program in India. And basically sometime I'm going beyond the question actually why social security, but the another question is, in my case, like the migrant workers. So 93% of migrant workers where we are working come from the social excluded communities. And basically for these kind of like the communities, scheme and entitlements are not enough to ensure the social security for the community. But I think how we can develop a system where these communities can include in our system, because most of the time, just because of their caste, just because of their like the communities, just because of the migration related issues, they excluded from the social security. So I think we need to address these kind of issues also.
Thank you, Ashif. Your points on portability, especially, and on widening what we recognize as social protection are very well taken. Thank you for bringing those up. Can I now go to Divya?
Avi, your voice is breaking, but I assumed you asked me the question, so I'm just going to.
Yes. Yes, please.
So I just wanted to sort of highlight a little bit about, taking examples from our own research, both on the issues of domestic work and construction work. But before that, I wanted to just quickly point out to a study that we conducted in 2019, just before the pandemic hit us. We reviewed over 6,000 studies from across the world to try and understand the impact of social protection for women in informal work, particularly with respect to maternal and child health. And it was really very interesting that, and I'm speaking from the academic side, it is really interesting that there wasn't a single study that we found that actually told us how social protection benefited women from women in terms of maternal and child health outcomes for women in informal work. And that's really a very curious thing, right? How little it is studied, how little that intersection between social protection and women in informal work and maternal and child health outcomes are studied. And today, as we sort of stare at another huge health and malnutrition related crisis, this question is going to come to haunt us for many, many years. So the point I was trying to make is that unfortunately, we all know that social protection is important. but very little evidence has been sort of, we worked on very little evidence to sort of look at what are the best ways, both in terms of taking this forward, as well as the impact, not just in the short duration, but also in the very long, long run. What kind of impact could it have for women and children in particular? I also wanted to say that with some of our work with domestic workers, one of the things that we realized is that it's not just enough to talk about social protection, but it's also important to talk about the timeliness of social protection. At what point the woman or the family is able to get access to this, any kind of cash transfer or any form of social protection is as critical as the idea of social protection itself. Especially with questions of rent, with questions of children's education, receiving health benefits at the right time, and very often we lose that moment of criticality. By the time the transfer is made, or by the time it has actually reached the household, it is so late that women aren't really able to benefit from that particular cash transfer in any way. So for me, that is also really critical. And I think through the pandemic, maybe one small hope that we found was the way in which unions really stepped up to negotiate with government, make lists, send them out to labor departments. Of course, not everybody was on the list, but even in the small numbers that they were able to achieve this, I feel like we have some hope for scalability in some sense. Also larger questions on the role of these other institutions, such as tripartite bodies like the Construction Welfare Board. We all know it has huge challenges. It doesn't work in most states, but it's also time for us to sort of question what it means to have these welfare boards. What does service delivery look like? It's one thing to create these welfare boards and pump in huge money to them through cess or other means, but a completely different thing to actually think of delivering social protection through these boards. And what does that really look like is a question I don't think we have bothered to answer so far. And maybe the pandemic was the first time that we even thought of what a cash transfer would look like if it had to be done at scale. So to me, I think lots of learning moments there through the pandemic. Yeah, I'll probably stop there because a lot of the other things have already been covered by the other panelists.
Thank you, Divya. My apologies about my connection. Hopefully it'll be better now. So I think what you raised about the timeliness of social protection payments is very valid. And of course, this is not a problem that is only for social protection, but if you look at government schemes at large, I think delays in payments, in transfers from the central to the state governments, and then finally to the beneficiaries has always been quite a challenge. With this now, I think what I'd like to go to questions from the audience. So about 5-10 minutes of if there are questions from the audience that we can take in. I have one here on my screen, which says, how can we come up with an integrated social protection system in India that reinforces the existing safety net machinery? So this question is open to all panelists.
Sorry, could you just repeat the question again?
How can we come up with an integrated social protection system in India that reinforces the existing safety net machinery?
So should I take a stab at it?
Please.
And I'm sure colleagues will add. I think the first step, what we've learned is it's important to consult with organizations who are actually working with informal workers or with the workers of our country, migrant, non-migrant, whosoever. I think one major problem that has bedeviled our social protection programs is that we think we know what people want, but it's important to understand what they want, what should be the delivery mechanisms, those issues of timeliness and appropriateness and so on that have been mentioned already. So that would be, I think, the first step. And I think we'd get quite a lot of answers. So I would always say have widespread decentralized consultations in different regions. Then I think that a major challenge for us is that social protection is not coming from any one ministry. There's some happening through the labor ministry, through health, through women and child. So there has to be some kind of convergence or some kind of common thinking that actually through one window, all these should be provided. And a few years ago, we took a stab at this. We made an attempt at this when the previous government had a social policy formula committee. And in that, we had suggested, how to integrate and have one card, because the portability issue has already been brought up, is very important, but also there's the issue of multiplicity of schemes. So, if there's one card for health, for microinsurance, for childcare, and so on, for example, pension, and of course, it must be portable. So those would be, I think the designing is critical first. And then even joint planning and taking inputs of those who are already working with workers on the ground, so that we don't commit the same mistakes that we have in the past. And then third, which would address the issue of the last mile and timeliness and so on, is that the actual implementation should be, in our opinion, handed over to unions, cooperatives, civil society organizations, which are close to the workers, which work with them at the grassroots, of course, with full accountability and working with the government machinery. And sometimes, organizations like ours, for example, have their own social protection mechanisms. Frankly, in the absence of widespread social protection mechanisms, we invented our own through cooperatives. So those efforts should be strengthened. I'm not necessarily saying they should be scaled up. I would be more for in favor of decentralized autonomous models. Let there be 100 flowers blooming. Why should there be just one sort of master plan social protection model? But I think the design stage is critical, and then all along the way, inclusive, participatory, having the voice of workers and their organizations at the table as we craft these, we co-create them. I think that would be important.
Thank you, Mirai. Would anyone else like to respond as well?
Yeah, I wanted to add a few points. So basically, I will give you one example of one-stop crisis centers in India. So basically, for the gender-based violence or sexual violence, government set up a one center in each district where they establish a single window for each and every survivor, and they can get social support, medical support, police-related support, legal aid. So I think for the social security or social protection, we need to establish a similar kind of system. As Mirai said, we have multiple social security schemes. And for each and every scheme, the worker or like the community member need to go in a different department. For one scheme, they need to go to the social justice department. For another scheme, they need to go panchayat secretary. For third scheme, they need to go to the disability department. So basically, that's very, very difficult for any like the community member. And if the people come from the unorganized sector, or like if they come from the Dalit or Adivasi community. So I think the idea of single window system for each and every social security program is a very, very important, and they can get the benefit from one place. Recently, we did a pilot actually, and we developed a technology called Jan Sathi. And basically, we included a eligibility engine in that technology. So for example, if we collect information, like 30 type of information from the worker, so that system produce a report that this particular worker or the family members eligible to get 24 or 25 different kind of social security benefits. And basically, if the government can introduce the similar kind of system with eShram portal, so basically you are collecting various kind of information from the community member. If the eShram portal can generate a report that this particular family is eligible for 12 different kind of social security benefit, and if system can also share that information with the relevant department, and if the family can get a message or some kind of information, you can just go and take your benefit or like apply for the benefit. That kind of system government can easily create with support of technology. So I think that kind of approach can reduce some of the challenges. And the one last thing, I again wanted to share one example with regards to BOCW. So in India, we have about 40,000 crore unutilized balances in the BOCW funds. And this money, like the state labor department collected from the construction companies as says, and basically it's not the taxpayer money, is a contribution of the construction industry for the worker welfare or social security of the unorganized sector worker, particularly construction worker. Basically, during the pandemic, in the last 1.5 years, construction worker, migrant worker face various kind of challenges related to transportation, challenges related to food, challenges related to employment. And no any single government utilize 100% of their, except Kerala, because they utilize more amount as comparative that they raise from the industry. But most of the state not utilize even more than 25% sales amount. So need, like the demand is very high, workers facing various kind of challenges, money is available, but no any state government able to use this money. Why? Just because of non-availability of delivery mechanism. And basically, if you want to establish a delivery mechanism, the state need to invest some amount of funding or human resources to develop that kind of system. And as per my understanding, state alone, so for example, in labor department, we have 3 people like the labor inspector and 1 labor officer in each and every district. So altogether in India, we have between 2,400 to 2,600 people at the district level in the labor department. And these 2,600 people are responsible to ensure social security or worker protection for like 450 million like workers. And that's impossible actually. So these, even if they are very good people in the labor department, they will not able to register the worker or ensure the social security benefit from the various kind of like this scheme. So I think in that context, one is a convergence of the various kind of scheme, the comprehensive approach where basically if we identify one family and that family required 4 different kind of like the social security benefit. So government need to ensure all the benefit at one time, because most of the time we provide like the employment security at one level. Then if the one person is disabled in the family, then after 2 years, we provide like the disability pension. In 3rd year, we provide some other kind of support. So no any like this systemic approach is exist in our current like processes where we can ensure the deduction in the vulnerability of the family. So their negotiation power, bargaining power can increase. And I think the last point is keep particularly like nowadays in India, we have various kind of like the technology, and we are introducing technology in various kind of like the other the government projects. But the use of technology in the social security or worker protection or social protection is very less. So I think that's very, very important, how we can increase the use of social security for this work to include each and every worker. And my last point is, keep most of the time we focus on exclusion criteria, how we can exclude particular family or individual from the social security. But if we can use the inclusion criteria, how we can include more and more people in the social security program, that would be very easy to reach more and more people in a very less period of time.
Thank you, Ashiv. Lots and lots of food for thought there. I have a question from the audience, which says, how do we ensure that portability and decentralization go together? Do states have the capacity to roll out such schemes? If not, what kind of capacity building and coordination might be required?
Just, I wanted to add one point and then other speaker. Yeah, so just one point. Actually in India, why like the destination states are not very much care about the migrant worker, because migrant worker voting at the source area. So if we can add the portability component in the voting right. So if I am like a voter of Bundelkhand, Madhya Pradesh, and if I am traveling to Delhi, a government can allow me to vote the Delhi government. So definitely Delhi government will care about my like the welfare or my social security. So I think we can, if we can do a very simple thing at the system level to ensure like the portability in the voting right, we will solve 50% of the problem, particularly for the migrant workers.
Thank you, Ashiv.
So if Divya wants to come in, fine. Otherwise, I have something to say on the capacity building.
Divya, would you like to come in?
I just wanted to say that very shortly, there is also a lot of difference in the way that some social protection schemes are universal and some that are specific to certain sectors. And, is mind-boggling when you look at some of these social. It's very unclear who is eligible for what and for how long. And the BOCW example is classic, right? There are so many schemes within the BOCW. Also remember that a lot of people keep shifting between sectors because of the nature of work, and especially during the pandemic, we saw a lot of women move from one sector to another. So what happens when you're transitioning between sectors constantly? And how do you then even approach this idea of social security that is not universal but sector specific? So these are two important questions. And with capacity building, I think it's a really important question to ask, both in terms of the spread of delivery. How do we sort of reach out to everybody, but also this question around who is the custodian of this money? And that's again a big question, because whether it's the BOCW or a department within the state, very often this money, it remains intransparent. We don't know how much the amount is. It was only because of the Supreme Court case that we know how much money is with each of the BOCWs in the states, right? So some of these questions absolutely remain critical, but the difference between universality and sector-specific schemes needs to be a little more transparent, cleared up, available in some format that even everybody can understand. With all my research skills, I fail to get many of it. So I don't think a person without access to internet can quite figure out what these schemes are.
Thanks. And just for clarity, just in interest of clarity, BOCW is building and other construction worker welfare, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Mirai, you wanted to come in, please.
Sure. So
and decentralization.
Yeah, on decentralization and capacity building, right? Yeah.
On portability, how do we?
And portability, of
Yes.
course. Yeah. So maybe I should start with portability. I very much agree with what Asif has said. What we hear very often is technically these schemes are portable, but in practice it is not so. And it's absolutely true that the host state finds this kind of a burden. And one way could be what has been suggested. But I think that along with portability, it's the convergence. But I also want to say that portability itself is not enough. Our experience with migrant and non-migrant workers is that they require an extensive amount of support by civil society organizations, unions, cooperatives, hand-holding. Because these schemes, I mean, one is that they may not be very transparent, but they're quite complex. And to navigate them and actually get the benefits, even if, as Asif gave that good idea about, getting a sort of notification to the family, that might be step one, but then actually getting them requires a lot of hand-holding. And one of the things we've been experimenting with are what we call Seva Shakti Kendras, or empowerment hubs, where women come in and they find out about all these schemes, and then they're actually helped to register online, because as has been said, it's not easy. Try some of these portals, it's very difficult. So that's one set of issues, portability, of course, but I think mindset change is very important. In the receiving states like mine, the state of Gujarat and Surat we work in, is a receiving state. And oftentimes I hear the local officials complain. I mean, they don't understand that migrant workers are actually adding to the state's GDP and so much more. They think it's all a big bother. So I think as part of capacity building, there needs to be exposure, maybe to the source villages, to understand people haven't come here for some picnic or joyride. They've come because they're desperate for livelihood, for survival, for a better future for their children. So I think capacity building, yes, but mindset change of the receiving state sometimes, I'm afraid, is required, perhaps through exposure. And on the decentralization, I want to say a couple of things. Obviously, capacity building is required, but I don't think that's insurmountable. I think the first thing we need to, there also a mindset change. The first thing we need to accept is a decentralized, localized approach. We do have a peer Panchayati Raj system with all its faults. It's there. It's not like nobody is there and there's nothing there in the village level or the mohalla level in urban centers. And some of our national programs, like the National Health Mission, have shown some success in decentralization, at least a start, even if it's not a perfect success. And of course, some states have always done better than others. So I think decentralization is not a new concept. The reason I say mindset change is required, and along with capacity building, is that often people don't want to let go of money. That's where it comes down to finally. I mean, the National Health Mission has these village health sanitation and nutrition committees, but it's a struggle to get those monies into the committees. Usually the ANMs or the medical officer uses it to do whitewashing of the primary health center, buying new curtains, which was never the intention of this. So I think, it does boil down to finances as well. So I guess I'm saying in summary, much more interaction with civil society organizations and workers. We do feel that helps to change hearts and minds. And then based on that, capacity building in areas. And, again, one size will not fit all. Some states like Kerala are way ahead in their thinking in some ways. So we'll just have to make tailor-made capacity building, and again, localized, district level downwards.
Great, thank you. I think, as part of these discussions, we are already answering many of the questions that we planned we'll be asking the panel later. I have another question from the audience, which says, during the pandemic, have you come across any innovative model for social protection from other developing countries, which can be replicated in India? If anyone wants to answer, Divya, Ashif, Mirai.
Well, yes, there are so many, and even our own homegrown models. But starting with others, I think the public health system, the universal health care system of Thailand, which is studied a lot by our own Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, has really been a model for many of us in the public health space. And I think that might be one reason, one answer to the question of why Thailand has done better than other countries during the pandemic and the COVID spread of the virus. I think some countries like South Africa have child support grants. I think one of the difficult things that women are facing now is that our Anganwadi centers in many states are still not open. Women can't go back to work and earn. So this is a real livelihood crisis for women. We can't enter the workforce again because where do we leave our children? But other countries have done well on this and have organized child support and daycare. And then, of course, basic income, which we're going to talk about later on. I think many countries have experimented with this and successfully during the pandemic, both to individuals, but also to their enterprises. And that has really done a lot to keep people afloat and to survive. And if I may just quickly add, I think our own homegrown efforts with all humility, our own Seva micro insurance, which now we're extending to other civil society organizations upon their request. I mean, we were able to negotiate with the insurance companies and develop a COVID product, in fact, for both home-based treatment and hospital care. It's modest, but the premium is also modest. 350 rupees, 400 rupees per annum, and COVID coverage up to 25,000. So it's a small start.
Thanks, Mirai. Would Ashif or Divya, would you like to respond to that, or I can now go on to the second question, larger question for the panel? So, I mean, of course, we've discussed this at different points in the Q&A session that we just had. And India really, the government really doubled down on a range of social protection measures we saw over the course of the pandemic in the last 2 years, whether it was through the midday meal schemes, the fact that we had this, decades of investment in frontline workers through Anganwadis or hospitals that really became the points of delivery for everything that the government needed delivered. Then the MGNREGA that was That was frankly the last port of call for migrant workers at a time when it was difficult to hold body and soul together. So, there have been examples of a lot of things that when investments have been made over a period of time that have delivered in times of a crisis for the country. But, we can all, I think we can all agree that much has been left to be desired, and there is a lot more that needs to be done. So my question now to the panel is, what do you think are the main challenges of India's current social protection architecture? And what would be, in your opinion, the top 3 priorities that need to be addressed on the most urgent basis? So India's current social protection system, what are the biggest challenges? And if you were to identify 3 priorities for Government of India to look at, what would those be? Divya, can I go to you first? Then I will ask Ashif to come in, and then Mirai, please.
I think for me, the priority, considering the huge health crisis we are, in the midst of currently, I would definitely suggest is maternal and child health. I think we are really staring at a huge child malnutrition issue, maternal health, also not just in terms of the physical health of the woman, but also the mental health related issues. So that would be number 1 priority for me. NREGA, of course, I mean, we have now abundant evidence to know that it is absolutely critical for sustenance, especially in the time of crisis. So that would be my second one. And third, I think a slight expansion on our understanding of social protection itself. One of the things that really came up when we were conducting various studies is the need to think of housing also as a very critical element when we talk about social protection. And that hasn't happened across states as much. And I would really like some focus on that as well as we move along. Because rent and housing conditions and homelessness and all of these questions have become really accentuated during the pandemic.
Thank you, Divya. So maternal and child health, including mental health, MG and REGA, and housing. Thank you. Ashif, can I go to you next, please?
Yeah, so some of the points actually related to the challenge I already covered. So the first challenge, I again like emphasis on political will. And I think political will only come from the voting right, a portable voting right. And I strong believe ki if the government can introduce this component, definitely the whole political will related issue will change. So that's the first thing. The second thing, some practical issues, because we discuss a lot about BOCW. So in some state, still in India, they require 90 days certificate to get the BOCW certificate. Okay. And these workers, basically the construction workers, they spend 1 month in one side, the second month in another side, and third month they migrate from Maharashtra to like Pondicherry or like Calcutta. So that kind of like the certificate or like the document, very difficult for the migrant community. But in most of the states in India, they required like 90 days or 100 days work experience certificate before providing the BOCW certificate, like the card. And that's a very practical problem, and government can easily solve. So I think that's a one example related to the BOCW, but similar kind of issues related to the ration card, related to the other social security benefits. So I think if the government can just map what kind of challenges community is facing, and they can easily solve this problem just to do a one thing, they can increase the inclusion criteria. And basically nowadays, every state is focusing on exclusion criteria. I can give you one example of Andhra Pradesh. So in Andhra Pradesh, people are applying for the social security benefit from the other state. And for the similar kind of benefit, people apply in Telangana and like Maharashtra, they get the benefit. But in Andhra, systematically, Andhra government basically excluded the communities because they said ki first you need to produce some kind of evidence ki you are a local citizen. And for the migrant community, that's a completely impossible. So I think that kind of like the mapping is important and change the selection criteria of the beneficiary. And I think again, I emphasize on the technology part, because now the people having a mobile phone, we have lots of technology, how we can use the technology to increase the delivery of social security benefit to the communities.
Thank you, Ashif. Thank you for that. Mirai, can I go to you next, please?
Sure. So I think in terms of the challenges and what needs to be done by our government and others is first and foremost, social protection has to be universal. We don't want to get into all this inclusion and exclusion. It has to cover all the citizens of the country. And if at all, the government can decide to exclude taxpayers, income taxpayers, and government servants and military, but everybody else, because they're all well covered. But everyone else should be covered. No APL, no BPL. The second important thing is we have to increase investment. You cannot have universal social protection or even extend what we have currently with such low levels of investment. I mean, for public health now with difficulty adding on water and sanitation, it may come up to 1.5% of GDP. If you remove all those, it'll be less. So, we had in a committee earlier suggested at least 2.5 to 3% of GDP on public health alone, universal healthcare alone. And we are demanding for childcare, universal childcare, at least 1% of GDP, building on Anganwadi's existing structures and infrastructure. So investment, without investment, we need the money. The third, I think, is the involvement, which keeps coming up in our conversation, involvement of unions, cooperatives, civil society organizations to actually co-create social protection so that all the detailing, digitalization, portability, all of that is taken care of. Now we know enough where the pressure points are. And the fourth, if I may cheat and take a fourth, is that we need to find ways to get the information out about the schemes to the workers. They don't know what they are covered for, how much, where, how to go about. And perhaps if there's that third point, partnership with civil society, then this would be taken care of to some extent. So those would be my three and a half points.
Thank you, Mirai. Thank you to the panel. This has been very helpful. I will now go again to the audience for questions.
Ami, I had a quick point that
yes, please.
Sort of addresses both the previous question as well as this. One of the ways in which we can also think about social protection is reducing the barriers, right? And one of the concerns that we've seen, at least with the benefits program, which is sort of a cash compensation for the waste loss during pregnancy and childbirth, is that there are so many conditionalities. You have to get the first antenatal checkup, then the second one. In the case of migrant workers, especially who are in between towns, who are in between home and the city, keeping these conditionalities is so challenging that despite having a protection program, it's of no use, because by the time they finish the paperwork and they've managed to sort of, satisfy all these conditionalities, it's too late. I mean, they've spent more money in trying to do this than actually get benefits from the program. So I think in some sense, the conditionality is literally the opposite of portability, right? You're making it so much more difficult for people to accept it, for people to have a great uptake. So I would think that is also a huge challenge and something that needs to be kept in mind when we design social protection. We cannot have so many barriers. The idea of social protection is to remove them, not pile them up for people.
Great, thanks, Divya. There is a question that is based on a point that was made earlier by the panel, which is the need to consolidate the many government schemes and reduce the fragmentation that's happening across government departments when we are delivering social protection. The question from the audience is, can the Aadhaar serve as the common base to consolidate the various programs? And what are the opportunities and challenges with that?
These difficult question to answer, because the evidence is so mixed. We know in various parts of the country where it has caused so many problems because fingerprints don't match, people simply don't, are unable to get a card, the name doesn't match the records and all of these other complications. So I don't think I have a straight answer for this one. It is really complicated, though in very few cases, we've also heard the benefit of it in terms, especially if you're a migrant migrant, because it provides as a base document to sort of prove your literal presence in the country. But there is enough information from various parts of the countries that it has backfired quite badly.
So just coming in and building on what Divya said, if I may, I mean, I think the Aadhaar card with all its faults can be a start. I mean, I completely agree with Divya on the difficulties, but it can be a start, but it shouldn't be the whole and soul. It's like digitalization. It's like we're all in favor of technology and digitalization, but many times it doesn't work in parts of the country. So there have to be both online and offline options. Similarly here, let's think creatively. Where it works with Aadhaar card, that's fine, but in many cases it may not. So then what other alternatives will be accepted? We need to hammer those out together. But on these multiplicity and plethora of schemes, I think all of us have done studies and found there's so many schemes and state-specific ones, central ones. So I think the first step would be that government has to take stock, or state governments for a start, in a decentralized manner, need to take stock. Which of these schemes actually are working, which have actually delivered to the people, the beneficiaries. And then if they haven't, then maybe those schemes should be collapsed into a common pool, and we could think of universal basic income. That's something that we have been talking about at SEWA for many years now. I remember the finance minister once of Jammu and Kashmir said that he found that just on old age and pension, there were some 20 schemes. And then because he was the finance minister, he converged them. So first, internally check what we can do to fuse or converge these schemes, and then weed out the useless ones. And maybe we don't want that money to go away, by the way. So that can go into a common pool that could be used for universal basic income. And then the harder nut to crack, of course, is converging across ministries, because all these schemes are siloed. And unfortunately, in our country, we do have this silo problem. So that's going to take not only political will, but some jugglery to get all the secretaries to sit together and do some pooling and creative thinking, of course, with the voices of workers' organizations, because again, we'll come up with things with barriers that have already been mentioned, and some impractical ideas from workers' point of view, grassroots point of view. So I think both of these need to be done if we have to get a sort of comprehensive and overarching integrated social protection architecture, and through one window. And even then we'll need support for navigation and handholding by civil society.
Thank you, Mirai, and thank you, Divya. I think you're very correct. The evidence on Aadhaar is quite mixed, and there's definitely an overwhelming amount of evidence on the problems with it. But at the same time, there seems to be potential to use it well. And Mirai, thank you for pointing it out. It can be a great start. But yes, as with all things, it's important that we don't stop there, and we think about what else we need to do. And getting all the secretaries in a room and agreeing and culling schemes, and so we're not very ambitious asks there. With that next question, what schemes in particular, whether Government of India or state schemes, have worked during the pandemic in social protection, which we can use to learn from? Are there any government schemes, whether at the state level or at the central level, that you think have actually worked well, especially in the context of the challenges that the three panelists have talked about, and what can we learn from them?
So I can share 2-3 schemes. So the first scheme, definitely NREGA. And Government of India also identify about 68 districts where the prevalence of migration is very high. And in these 68 districts, government started a program called Pradhan Mantri Jan Rozgar Abhiyan. So under that program also people get the employment, but I think that program is very similar to NREGA. So I think altogether the employment guarantee scheme, particularly in the source area, like the rural area, very helpful during that difficult period. The second is ration a program like the PDS. And in some places, definitely community face some challenges, particularly in an urban area, and particularly a migrant community face lots of challenges, but still that program very, very relevant for the community to get the immediate support in terms of like the ration support from the government. So I think these two programs, like the ration, food security and the employment guarantee, is very, very useful for community to overcome their challenges.
Thank you, Ashif. Divya or Mirai, if one of you would like to respond as well, please.
Yeah, totally agree with Asif, right? But also would like to add that in some states, the pension also has been helpful for workers. I'd also like to say what's not been helpful, if that's okay. And sort of one of the things I feel really strongly about is that we have still not opened Anganwadi centers widely, so women can't go back to work. I also think that the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which is the 5 lakh cover for families, which doesn't cover all, but it has been covering some. But unfortunately, it's hospital based. So if there were no hospital beds available, people couldn't avail of that. So, I think some rethinking is also required. And the third is, a huge missed opportunity, which is that we have not been able to extend basic micro insurance, for wage loss, livelihood loss, and also even just some basic health insurance to all our people. And that is a missed opportunity, which I hope we can remedy on now from the lessons of the pandemic.
Great. Thank you. Another question that we have is on digital solutions. The question says, digital solutions have crowded the space of accessing social protection, but they all talk about only the demand side. Aside from political will, what are the key barriers at the supply side that we need to get digitally backed social protection going? So what are the supply side barriers that we need to work on?
So I think one nation, one ration is very like classic example. And on a real time, we can see the impact number, or basically how many ration card linked with their Aadhaar or mobile number, because like these three things are different things. So like ration card, then mobile number and the Aadhaar number. So in India, about 18 crore ration card linked with their Aadhaar and the phone. So that's a very big number and very important number. And I think as far as like the PDS concerned, it's a like big development. So in terms of like supply, government initiates some processes. But when you see the numbers, how many workers get the benefit under the One Nation, One Ration scheme. So as of now, I think till last month, I think only 68,000 households receive the benefit under One Nation, One Ration card. In India, we have about 15 to 24 crore migrant workers, but out of that, only 68,000 families get the benefit. So I think at some level, government use the technology, share the number, transparency mechanism increase, all these things going on, but still community is not able to connect with the technology. And basically when we work with the technology, so definitely like the demand side, supply side, both the side we need to work. But same time, the interface between the community and the government program, that's also very, very important. And sometimes that aspect is missing from the government technology initiative as far as the One Nation, One Ration scheme.
So from our experience on the supply side, what's required is really not that different from what's required with designing social protection. There has to be much more interaction right from the designing stage with workers and their organizations, because we found that some of the portals are not really user-friendly. Even the language, English, it's not in multiple Indian languages. And often they say, oh, we start with English and then but it doesn't work like that. Then we'll come to the other languages. But how long should workers wait for that? But on the other hand, we found good experience if you work with the tech folks from the beginning, sit across the table, tell them what's workable and what works, and where could be possible bottlenecks. So what Asif said, that we have to work together for this. There's no point creating the software and then realizing, oh, we missed this, we missed that barrier's there, this barrier's there. So there's got to be much more interaction, I think. And the whole approach should be to make it user-friendly, to make it simple. And also to, it's not just the software. We have to also address issues like lack of digital literacy among large numbers of our fellow citizens, and particularly the gender digital divide. Digital literacy is one thing, but as I mentioned earlier, the devices are not in the hands of the poorest and women in particular. So those are some of the issues. But definitely, I think technology, digital platforms have really been very beneficial, and many of us have become quite strong converts, but we have a long way to go.
I just wanted to add that, we seem to have grand plans with all things digital. So we are very quick to come up with digital solutions, but how do we actually make it work? That's the question we don't invest enough time on. So the e-Shram that is now rolled out, and there has been a huge demand for it, right? Because suddenly there is, at least through the pandemic, people know that they have to be registered to avail of schemes. So there are long lines everywhere. But I wish as much effort was sort of put into the delivery side of it. Where do these registrations happen? How quickly can we do it? Now there are all these localized private hotspots, booming up everywhere, which charge twice the amount of what a local government cell would charge. So all of these questions of delivery is a huge issue. And as Miraiji said, I would be really concerned about women not getting onto these digital platforms. We also know that women are less likely to use the internet or even have access to phones that are able to register and so on. So definitely, already women are not recognized as workers, and then with this platform, it's that remains a fear that probably they remain unregistered more in comparison to men.
Thank you. I fully agree with all the points made. One of the things I often say is, how digital is a tool, it's not a goal in itself. And the problem is that we keep talking about digital, if that's, as if that's sort of the idea of every, gold standard for everything. And I think that's hugely problematic. And point very well taken on the need to involve communities in design, because, that's the best way to solve the supply side issues. If you're going to, the people who are going to be needing and using these platforms, if we involve them at the design process, that's the best way to weed out what can or cannot work. And finally, Divya, what you said on rents, the whole parallel economy that opens up when we have these digital solutions, right? You go to a bank and you want to open an online bank account, and there's someone sitting outside and will take 100 rupees from you and will help you fill in the form, or same for Aadhaar cards and everything else. So that's not the kind of job creation that we are looking for. So yes, very, very valid points made. And I have another question here on the role of the private sector. Now, the informal sector, the largest employer of the workforce, a large part of these are our big construction companies, right? The DLFs of the world. What do they owe to their workers in terms of social protection? What should their contribution to be? What is our expectation as academia, civil society, as the voice of the vulnerable, in a sense, I'm sorry that probably came out wrong, but as people who are speaking on these issues, what is our ask of the private sector, both the large and the small firms?
I can respond to this because I've been doing research on this for many years now, and every time I interview somebody from a builder's company or a contractor or even sort of a site engineer, the first response I get is, we're already paying the cess. So how can you expect us to look after the workers again? So this kind of language that has become now so all-pervasive, right, about transferring the responsibility constantly between sort of the private sector and the government, cess being collected, but nobody, like Asifji said, we don't know where the money is, what it is being used for, and if it is ever going to be used in any way anyways, and the concern that the private sector has about already paying this large cess, then why are you asking us to look after our employers? But I do think that unless we are really able to have that communication open with private employers, this is going to be very tricky in the long run. especially with, questions of women not getting to rise through the ranks. If you think of construction sector, for example, unless we are able to have that dialogue open, with the employers, it's going to get more and more challenging. Because we are working, the work conditions, of course, there's all these reforms that are going on, labor reforms, which is a huge challenge in itself, but also this concern of the labor force now looking a little different. More children are beginning to come to work again. Adolescent girls are back in the labor force. So we really have to take this conversation more seriously now than ever before.
Yeah, I can add 2-3 other points also. So first of all, we strongly believe that social security or social protection or worker protection is the responsibility of state. So state basically ensure this like entitlement or right for the community. But same time, as you rightly mentioned, key industry can play a very important and crucial role. And I will share 2-3 examples. So basically, we are working with multiple construction sites across like 104 districts of India. And we engage with some of the companies. So for example, Godrej, Tata Realty, these kind of like the big construction brands, as well as we are working with the investors for the infrastructure project like HDFC Capital and some other companies. And basically we realize that these companies can also get the benefit if the worker receive the social security. So basically retention rate is increased. Definitely company get the benefit because of the retention rate. But most of the time, companies are not aware. As Divyaji mentioned, some companies are aware that they are paying cess. But when we discuss with the promoters of the company, they are not very much aware about the BOCW. So some HR people definitely or management people are aware, but the promoter of the company, they are not very much aware that we are paying like 100 crore or 150 crore into the cess. And basically, that's why they are not trying to ensure the accountability. So I think particularly with the cess fund, if we want to ensure the accountability and transparency, for that role of industry is very, very important, because they are paying that money. And if they can ask question, I invest 100 crore, where this money is spent by the BOCW boards? Because civil society organization definitely raise voice, unions can raise voice, but if this money come from the industry and if they can raise the voice, that would be more impactful and effectful. So that's one point. The second point is in the delivery mechanism. So for example, entitlement is a responsibility of state, but industry can help the delivery for the delivery mechanism. And basically recently we launched a campaign where we are appealing to the industry, okay, you will pay 365 days wage to the worker, and you can pay 1 day wage for delivery of the social security to the worker. And you can engage with third party, any civil society organization, any union or any other service provider, and that service provider can facilitate the delivery, because it's the money of social security will come from the government, but delivery mechanism is very, very important. And in the current situation, or even in next 3 to 5 years, government is not able to like develop that kind of like the large level mechanism for the delivery, and industry can also pay or play an important role for that. So that's more related to the industry. But my last point is more related to this, like this behavior or understanding of our society. And basically during against the government or ask to the government ki what you are doing, 10% people raise question against the industry ki you are not doing anything for your worker. But as society, we are not thinking ki this is not a only government issue or industry issue. Society can also think about that, because these are our fellow citizens, and we completely forget our responsibility. So how we can facilitate as like the society member. And I think that's a very, very important. And that's why I raised this question ki most of the time when we discuss about the social security or social protection, we only think about the entitlement, some kind of like the financial benefit for the community or any other kind of benefit for the community. But the respect and dignity is also very important, and that comes from the society. And I think we need to engage with the society also. So I think from my understanding, I think the role of government, industry and investor and society is very, very important to ensure dignified social security or social protection for marginalized communities.
Can I come in as well?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So there are 2 points that I want to make. One is that the mass of informal workers are purely self-employed. They are street vendors, and the largest are in the rural sector. And we know they are in farming. They are small and marginal farmers and predominantly women. They don't have any construction worker board type situation because they don't have any identifiable employer. So we have to think out of the box what to do with the mass of citizens who are purely self-employed. And completely agree that the government has to have the stewardship, but our government alone can't do everything. And the private sector, frankly, is also benefiting from the informal economy. It's not really compartmentalized. There's a continuum between formal and informal. So private sector, the corporates also have a responsibility. And I think many of them recognize this. And what we saw during the pandemic is that many of them, when approached, were ready to step in because everyone felt very much for the informal workers and for the migrant workers. People from unexpected quarters also stepped in. So the first point I want to make is that the government, of course, should take the leadership and responsibility, but I think we need to have a wider social dialogue, as has been expressed already, with all sectors of society. This is about all of us. This is not some charity that we're giving. It's the right of the workers, and we're all in this together. Hasn't the pandemic taught us that? We're all in this together, and it's the responsibility of everybody. And the private sector can also contribute to a social protection fund or a livelihood restoration fund. Call it what you will. Livelihood comes social protection restoration. Maybe we make it, tax deductible for them or whatever, or have a cess like for construction workers, have a across the board cess for all employers in India, regardless of whether they have an identifiable employer-employee relationship. And this can go into a common pool. The problem, and we've discussed this with private sector and industry leaders, is that they don't have faith that this money will reach. We've just heard about the construction workers board. They don't have faith that it'll reach where it's supposed to reach. So another thing that would have to be built in is whether this can be decentralized to the states or maybe having state level such funds, which is further decentralized into the districts. And our experience is that employers as a class, when you relate with them, with their associations, trade associations, sometimes we're quite pleasantly surprised they do actually support, for example, childcare, even if it's not for their worker. I mean, people do want to also do some good anyway, and do want to contribute to solidarity and society mechanisms. So I think that the point of a wider social dialogue is really important, with government taking stewardship, but eventually it does come down to finances, and that money has to be found from somewhere. And I do believe the private sector, which is benefiting hugely in many, many ways, and from the informal economy, needs to contribute and be held to account.
Thank you once again. Great responses. I am particularly struck by what Ashif said on the need to build in that private sector government accountability, where the private sector feels that they can hold the government accountable. And that links me right to your point about one of the reasons that funding is not flowing in, or more funding could flow in if we were to fix this, is this accountability issue. I think that's a very important point to make. Now, I want to go to the next question, which asks if there's a strong correlation between the successful working of social protection schemes on the ground and the presence of local NGOs and organizations, and how can this relationship be put to greater use? We've of course touched on this earlier in the context of the need to involve communities when we are designing these schemes. But in your experience, when the schemes are finally implemented on ground, have you seen that they tend to be more successful when the civil society is stronger? Do they reach more people? Are the exclusions fewer? Or do you think that it's once the scheme is designed and being delivered, then the role of the civil society, or the ability of the civil society society to influence implementation is weaker. And it's actually at the design stage or maybe at the evaluation stage is when we need to get those linkages stronger. So that's really the question. I mean, the question was the first bit, and then I added my bit onto it. So to the panel, please.
I think one of the things that we've learned through the pandemic is the absolute importance of having a network of organizations that are able to help with service delivery, right? Because kind of scales that we are dealing with, it's practically impossible to do it through the existing machinery unless that expands in itself. And also to think of, in the absence of Anganwadis, the other additional roles that organizations are playing at the ground with, rations, with childcare support and all of that. So I think there is definitely, at least through the pandemic, this has sort of come up quite openly that, this network of organizations, trusting them, taking their help in service delivery is very critical. And I think we are hoping that this only gets better from here in the next few years. Yeah.
So just jumping in, I just think that wherever there have been local organizations, unions, cooperatives, women's self-help groups, that's where again and again, pandemic of course, but even in non-pandemic times, that's when actually the benefits reach the last mile for all the reasons already discussed. Not just in the designing of them, but also informing people of their rights, of what are their entitlements, then how to actually navigate the system right up to grievance redressal, and without giving any speed money or bribes to anybody or resorting to touts who fill up forms. All these things are taken care of by a strong civil society presence. So I'm not saying that without civil society, nothing will be done, but clearly wherever there are these organizations, and preferably local, working closely with the grassroots, then we do see that there is a dramatic uptake. Of course, some states are particularly good, and we keep hearing about Kerala and Tamil Nadu, and even Himachal Pradesh and some of the northeastern states. They manage, and perhaps there are not that many civil society organizations in some of these states, and they do well too. So it's not a black and white picture, I think. But I think my experience across the country is by rule of thumb, wherever there's civil society organizations, it certainly makes a difference.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add 2 points. So the first point, not only like the NGOs or not-for-profit per se, but within the civil society, various kind of like the stakeholders are there. For example, as Miraji said about unions or self-help groups, and like the civil society organization, Dalit groups or community-based institution. All these institutions can play a very important role to ensure social security. And I will just share with you one example. So last October, we started a collaborative called Migrant Resilience Collaborative, and we are working with about 40 like the civil society organizations across like 13 states. And basically at source and destination, these organizations facilitating social security benefit for the migrant community. And as of now, we applied for various kind of social security benefit for like 1.5 million households, like 15 lakh household applied for the social security benefit. And out of 15 lakh, 11 lakh like household receive 1 to 3 social security benefit in the last like 1 year. And I think that kind of like the number just comes because of the engagement and involvement of the like multiple civil society organization, as well as the different kind of like the institutions. So that's one point. The second point is if we can strategically engage with other stakeholders also. And I will just give you one example of India Post Payment Bank. So last like early this year, we signed a MOU with India Post Payment Bank. And basically India Post Payment Bank is facilitating opening the bank account of the migrant community and linking their Aadhaar card with the phone number and the bank account. And these things are very small thing actually, linking the Aadhaar with the bank account. But basically during the first wave, government transfer money under the BOCW and some other program to the migrant worker. and 33 or 34% migrant worker not able to receive to or get this money actually, because their like the bank accounts are endowment bank account, and basically this engagement helping us to active their bank account or link their Aadhaar and the mobile number with the bank account. So I think role of NGOs is also very important, but strategic partnership with the bank, private sector and other stakeholder also help us a lot to like increase the impact of the social security or the delivery mechanism.
Yeah, but Ami, also I wanted to say that, you know, even the government has recognized the role of civil society in this pandemic. Even the head of Niti Aayog has said. But one major gap that remains is that when it comes to implementation, actually delivering with the budgets, providing the budgets to actually reach, say, to migrant workers or to informal women workers, that's where governments, municipalities, state governments in many cases are reluctant. And we had an experience some years ago where we were asked by our government, I think Gujarat government was the first one to hand over running of ICDS to some organizations. And in our case, our childcare cooperative was running more than 100 ICDS centers and managed to do it well with all the accountability and audit. But then, you know, there's a trust issue. There's a feeling that why should this be done by them? This is the job of government, which it is. But, you know, it's a matter of reaching the unreached. So that's where we come in.
I also wanted to add that, you know, in moments of crisis, it's really important to recognize this last mile connectivity of these organizations on the ground, right? When it was really, the government was really delayed in rolling out any kind of response post the lockdown, it was organizations that self-organized, you know, got together, built networks, not just within the city, but across states, across, you know, various other states. And that sort of quick response is something we could learn from, you know, which you know, the state could learn from, and it could have been much easier had the state taken them into confidence and said, you know, this is going to happen and what is the best way we can reach out to people. So I think it should have been the other way around, but unfortunately the government was delayed and it was the organizations that had to step up first. I hope in the future, if you know, if ever we come through a moment of crisis like this, we do it the other way, where the organizations really support the government and not the other way around.
Thank you. I just got a reminder from Saksham, who's reminded me we have 10 minutes to go on the panel. So I'm going to quickly go into our third question, which is that, you know, the idea that many have argued whose time has come. What is the panel's view on a universal basic income or even a targeted basic income? And what are the practicalities? And do you think that India has not just the administrative capability, but also the fiscal space to roll something like this out? So can I first go to Mirai and then Ashif and then Divya, please?
Sure, thanks, Ami. You know, you may be aware some years ago, we did an experiment with the support of UNICEF in with our colleagues in Seva, Madhya Pradesh, in one district, in some villages. And it was actually a longitudinal study and lots of interesting learnings came out. First, based on that, the importance of universal basic income without any conditionalities, unconditional and universal basic income. And interestingly, some of the better off people in the village initially were reluctant to join. They felt, okay, well, we don't need this 400 rupees per month. But they soon understood that this was more than just the money. It was solidarity, as has been mentioned. It was pooling, bringing everybody together. So that was one thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say is that, which I already mentioned, that there are many, many schemes which, I'm sorry to put it bluntly, are quite useless. They don't reach the workers or the poor. So those may be reviewed, and you know, we don't want that money taken away, but those monies can be reassigned to a common pool for universal basic income. And the third thing is that we also need to work a lot with banks or post offices. We had a very difficult experience with the banks. The banks felt this was a headache because every month a certain amount was put in the bank accounts of every man and woman, and even for the children in the bank account. So they felt this is really tedious and too much work for us. So there's got to be much more engagement. Perhaps the postal service would be better, but there's to be much more engagement with these kind of delivery mechanisms at the local level. And then I think what's important is to answer your question whether this works. We don't know, is the honest truth, in a country that is as vast as ours. So what is required and what we've been saying for a while is let there be more experimentation. Let us take up in more states, urban, rural, these kind of programs. I don't want to use the word pilot exactly, but experimenting in different parts of the country so we understand what could be the bottlenecks, what could be the advantages and disadvantages. One disadvantage that we saw is that while everybody welcomed cash and there was some conversion to better nutrition, school textbooks and all that, there was also buying of healthcare. And that without health literacy, you might be buying irrational drugs also. And this doesn't let the government and the government social services off the hook. You must have a proper public health system in place as well. It's not either or. We're not saying cut out PDS, cut out public health. So, we should be clear about that. But I think that money going into bank accounts of all, and even in Jan Dhan Yojana, even though there were many who didn't get, but even that was a support at a very critical time. So I think, yes, to answer your question, the time has come. Let us have more experimentation, different parts of the country with different workers, study it, learn, and then craft something together, co-create.
Thank you, Mirai. Quickly go to Ashif and then Divya. I think we are in the last 5 minutes now.
Okay, so I completely agree with Mirai, but I just wanted to add 2 points here. So basically, we have multiple social protection program currently, and government, state government or central government or like the relevant department are not able to deliver these social security or social protection program at a ground level. How we are expecting we can introduce a new program and then they will effectively implement that program? That's the first point. Definitely, we can go with the universal basic income kind of like the initiative, but as Miraiji mentioned about, she not used the word pilot, but definitely we need to do pilots in various kind of state, in Kerala as well as in Jharkhand. So to just understand the nitty-gritty of this concept or idea in our country. And if most of the time when the government introduced this kind of program, definitely government replace this initiative with ration, employment guarantee, health, food security, and many other programs. That's not a good idea, because that thing is also very, very important. And basically, if we will just provide financial support to the community and not provide ration, so definitely malnutrition will increase and many other like the problem increase at the community level. So I think these two things are completely separate things, like the basic universal basic income security for the community, but as well as the social security or social protection for the community. And the last point, I think if we will develop a very robust and very solid structure at a ground level for the delivery of these kind of like the entitlement as well as the other benefit to the community, that kind of structure will use for the basic income as well as the social security. So I think like the investment required from the government side to create a very robust and very like powerful system at a ground level to deliver these kind of like the things.
Thank you, Ashif. Divya.
I think they've said it. I just say that, universal basic income cannot be the reason for withdrawing other programs. So absolutely, like what Asif ji said, maintaining those kinds of support structures that already exist. There's also very interesting conversation around urban employment guarantee. So we have to sort of wait and watch, which of these options work. I'm not an economist, so I'm being slightly careful here about the fiscal answer. I don't think I know enough to address that.
And we have a question in the chat pad that I'll quickly take on this. Can we expect people to pay premiums for social insurance or a UBI, or should we expect the government to fit the bill as it does in Ayushman Bharat?
I think our experience is that if people trust the system, they're willing to contribute something. They obviously can't contribute the entire cost, but contributory also has its benefits because there's a certain amount of accountability and demand built into it. But I think people should not be excluded because they can't contribute. So it's a tricky question. It's a tricky question, and the government, with private sector support, employers also need to contribute, should be contributing the majority.
Great, thank you. I think looks like with that, we're at the end of it. We had a, thank you to the panel for an excellent discussion. I was taking down some points about, what it is that I need to say to round up. At some point I stopped because all this amazing, really brilliant points and information that has come, some of the things that I am going to try and capture. In the last, we discussed the importance of portability given the migrant situation that we all recently saw, the very, very important point about decentralization, not just in terms of delivery, but also in terms of planning. Similarly, the role of civil society. And, as they were rightly pointed out, if, this is one of the important lessons from the pandemic, the expansion of the scope of what we understand as social protection, whether it includes the dignity of life, of labor, or of maternal and childcare benefits, the need for the private sector to step up, the need to strengthen the accountability between the private sector and governments, the need to experiment with UBI. I mean, I think it's also clear that while the idea is good, the panel overall felt that there is a need to investigate this further on the fiscal question. But the best way to find answers is to start going in the field and start the experiments that we need to do, as opposed to dismissing the idea. And finally, of course, the ever important political will and administrative challenges, which really sort of are all encompassing and really the bugbear, irrespective of what it is that we're trying to deliver on the ground. So that was my summary of the discussion. And thank you again, everyone, for participating, to the audience for participating. Thank you very much, and I wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for a very effective and thought-provoking session. With this, we'll take a break.